صح عليكم للجميع صح فطوركم.
Uh, Hello, everybody, and bon appetit. We are going back to our last session, and it's going to be revolving around waste in general and waste management. So I am going to be also hosting many of my colleagues and peers. It's going to be a passionate and an interesting dialogue and discussions. We are going to host many of our colleagues who have a rich experience in encountering or in dealing with the waste management. We're going to start with Leen Sraj, solid waste management consultant from Nadeera, and she has been a partner in setting up Yalla Return product in Lebanon. She has also been planning waste studies and infrastructure design for Nadeera projects, preparation of solid waste management plans for major developments, infrastructure, and industrial facilities. Mohamad Kamal is our second speaker, and he is a co-managing director, Greenish. He's a public health engineer with expertise in solid waste management and plastic pollution. He is the current co-director of Greenish, an organization that works on environmental awareness, education, and advocacy. And finally, our third speaker, Nadine Wahab. Nadine is a founder and director of EcoDahab. She's established Sustainable Network Egypt, which is a network of organizations and associations who work on reducing the use of plastic in Egypt. She has started an initiative called EcoDahab, which is a sustainable destination management organization in Dahab, South Sinai. Our discussion is going to be about waste management in general, and this topic is going to be linked to just transition. And as you all know, since we all live in the Arab world, and since we have been visiting many Arab countries, we will notice that Arab countries do suffer from this huge problem, which is the waste management problem. And this problem is related to many of the points that we have already discussed, related, for example, expanding urbanization, increased population, and the transformation of consumption types and patterns, in addition to the improvement of the life conditions in the whole region. So all that has led to tangible effects on the quantity and type of waste that is produced by the region. So first we're going to give the floor to Mohamad, who is going to tell us about a few terms which we are going to be using throughout this whole session. And of course, you're going to give us your opinion about that. Afterwards, we're going to tackle 4 points through the questions. The first one is related to decision makers and policy makers and their view of the waste management. The second question is related to the activists and how the activists are working on waste management or are trying to treat this waste problem. And we are going to tackle the communities of practice that we have already discussed yesterday. Afterwards, we're going to talk about the best practices that we have been witnessing in different countries. And the last point is related to recommendations and the alternatives that could be applied in the Arab countries. So thank you so much for your attendance of this last session. We know it's after lunch, and it's a session that is organized after lunch, but we're going to try and make it as interesting as possible. Those of you who are in this hall and the others who are on Zoom, you can send your questions directly to us. So the first intervention by Mohamad. Thank you very much. Thank you for your invitation and thank you for the introduction. First, I would like to show you, so I will go one step back. In Arabic, I'm going to speak in Arabic, and we have certain terms that we use in Egypt that are different from the ones used in other Arab countries. So it's very important to set up the terminology. First of all, when we say nufayat or waste, it is used in the Arab countries, and there are so two words for waste. We have mukhallafat and so I have مخلفات and نفايات. The مخلفات is somewhat remnants. Let's call it remnants. The remnants can be used and reused and recycled. Kumama and Zubala are the same usually in the Egyptian dialect, and we usually use it as an equivalent for waste. Now, in the Jordanian law and in the Iraqi law, we don't use the word mukhallafat or remnants. Also, we have this hierarchical organization of the solid waste management, and it starts with avoiding or reducing my consumption of remnants. Afterwards, I will try to reuse it. So instead of having that remnant, we will reuse it. And again, here I am trying to take you from the most sustainable choices to the least sustainable choices. Afterwards, we have recycling and recovering. When we say recovering, it means that I managed to extract a value of this remnant based on the material used for this remnant. For example, if I have a used piece of paper and I recycle this piece of paper or do something with it, then I have recovered it. Treatment also, it reduces the negative effects of the remnants, and at the end we have the disposal. So this is how we should think about it.
تمام. طيب الشكل اللي قدام حضراتكم دلوقتي
Here you have this. So we are trying here to show you how the same parameter that we have seen works in reality. First, we have waste generation. Here we're talking about solid waste. When we're talking about solid waste, there is dangerous solid waste and the non-dangerous solid waste or safe solid waste. Dangerous solid waste should be disposed of directly. However, non-dangerous solid waste, such as the domestic or household solid waste, this is not dangerous and we can do something with it. So after the waste generation, and we have the waste collection. However, moving from point A to point B will depend on the midpoint, which is whether or not we have waste segregation, because after waste collection, we have the transfer station. And according to what was happening before, whether or not we have segregated the waste or not, then the waste could be sent to a landfill or dump site, or we can do something with it. And of course, we have entry points here related to the transfer station or transformation points. For example, some of the remnants could be turned into compost, or it could be used in other ways. So the question is, how can we make that trip that the waste is taking shorter, which means since the first beginning of the waste generation phase, how can I reduce the waste generated in order to make the waste sent or transferred to the landfill or dump site smaller or fewer. So we have a few questions related to solid waste management. And when we say solid waste management, if we want to look at it as a field or a sector, you may think that it's quite difficult and complicated because it's based on a lot of data and figure, but it's very easy. It is the influx of the waste from point A to point B. If I can control this trajectory, let's call it, of the waste, then the waste management is already done. The four main questions to ask when managing waste in any setting are: who will generate or what activities will generate solid waste? Is it a household? Is it a factory? I need to understand what type of remnants we have. Also, how will this waste be stored or contained? And who is responsible for collection? And when we say collection, we don't mean transportation, because the collection means putting all these remnants or this waste together, and then we have transportation. And how many times per week? At the end, we have where will the waste be disposed? When we're talking dispose, we're talking also recycling, we're talking about reusing, and so on. So these are the main four questions, and based on that, we build our data, we build our worksheets, and so on. The last slide is going. I'm showing you all these slides. I'm showing you this PowerPoint in order to structurize our discussion. The last slide will show us the integrated solid management, the solid waste management, and it's built on two things. We have a tangible side of it, and we have an administrative side of it. So this is something that has been around for a while, and it was studied by a professor from 26 to 12, from 2006 to 2012, and that doctor came up with the idea or the concept of integrated solid waste management. And first, we need to ask ourselves, why do we do that? First, because waste is a burden on us, because it is a threat to hygiene, it is a threat to public health, it reeks with a bad odor, so I need to collect it. Why do I need to? And then I need to dispose of it in order to preserve the environment, our immediate or direct, our immediate environment, and the larger environment or bigger environment. Also, we need to remember that this waste used to have a value because it was something valuable before I used it. So if I want to think from the perspective of the circular economy, I will think, you know, this we have this item, I am using it as a resource, and then I am disposing of it later on. So how can we reuse that, or how can we make a benefit from it, make a gain from it? Now, but the yes, but integrated in the integrated solid management, we notice that the treatment is not as important as the collection and transportation and so on. So the integrated solid management, the solid waste management is dependent on the country that is applying it, and also dependent on the consumer, which means who is calling for this waste to be collected and reused. For example, if we're talking about the urban areas and the rural areas, there is a different type of consumption because of the different types of needs. So I'm going to find a different type of waste. The fifth point is the financial sustainability, and this is our main problem in the Arab world. The main problem in the Arab world is the fact that we don't have a lot of financial sustainability and we don't have enough data. For example, I could be conducting a certain study in 2020, but I could be only basing my information on the reports from 2001. Also, what is the legislation related to waste? The last few years, Jordan and Egypt have enacted laws related to solid waste, but when it comes to the regulations, we still need some more clarifications because the responsibilities are not well assigned. So what should we do? First, we need to find and collect data in a periodical way, in a constant way. I need to have a system for the collection of data with a system that would be able to adapt with the changes. And the last part is to have to use the different experiences in similar regions and similar countries in order to improve my system. So I will stop here, but this was my main introduction. The main terminology, like for example, integrated solid waste management is one of the main things that we need to focus on because we are going to use this term especially often now, even though we know that it is very difficult to implement it right now.
شكرا محمد. شكرا على كل معطيات هذه. يعني كانت نية من انه البانل ينطلق اولا يعني تعريف المصطلحات
Thank
المختلفة
you, Mohamad. It is important to have started this panel with the introduction with terminology. That is very important. We need conceptual understanding as well. And we will shift now to the Lebanese experience, perhaps. Do you think that decision makers in general in Lebanon or in other countries are aware of the depth and complexity of the residues, waste, garbage issue, so name it as you wish. Do you think that decision makers are aware of the complexity of this waste problem?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invite. Actually, what I'm going to build on what Mohamad was saying about the integrated solid waste management process. In Lebanon, speaking about our experience here, authorities and legal platforms, they know that a problem exists and they have structured laws and regulations, but we lack three main things. The first thing is the financial incentives for the government to implement these policies or these strategies that they are putting, as well as the political will. So we can see here, and all of us, we know that what's the political situation here. We lack this political will to implement these policies or even the strategies or recommendations for all the values or the value chain that was Mohamad was talking about, from the 3 Rs or from awareness or even processing and exporting when it comes to recycling. As well, what we have experienced now in our work with Nadeera and with the Yalla Return project, that there are a lot of bureaucracies when it comes to regulations. So I want to connect this point to a point where we have now so many initiatives or startups that are working on solving the solid waste management problem in Lebanon or in any other part of the Arab world. But especially in Lebanon, we have been struck with these bureaucracies for us to implement our project, and this is what is taking us a bit of time to launch or to even start projects in some areas in the country. So the policies, regulations, the strategies for an integrated solid waste management are seen in the country. We have been backed up by His Excellency, the Minister of Environment, so many times. But when we want to start implementing these regulations or policies, we are struck by either financials or other political wills who exactly.
ثانك يو لين. نادين، نعرف اللي كنت طرحت عليك السؤال نتاع حوكمة النفايات كان عندك موقف.
Nadine, regarding waste governance, you had a very clear position regarding that point in particular. Can you tell us more about your viewpoint regarding the governance in the sector?
Policy change, in particular engaging with government, I ask myself, what have we done? Or have we done our part? And honestly, when it comes to waste management or dealing with plastic waste, we in the Arab world have done nothing. We don't separate plastic, and when I've told people we can recycle, for example, in Cairo, the Leen do separate the plastic and use it in other ways. Most houses that are interested in supporting some kind of policy shift, whether it's an activist or someone who's just come up to me, I ask them, do you separate at home? They said there is no separation. And well, there actually is. If you just put it in a separate plastic bag, it is utilized and you don't contaminate the plastic with the organic material. We actually naturally in the region, and I'll talk mainly about Egypt, we have ways of dealing with organic waste, maybe not in the larger cities, but I'm sure we can find them in the larger cities, but outside the cities by giving them to goats, chickens. In Dahab, there's a lot of communities that use this for composting. You can use this for urban gardens. So when we start talking about policy recommendations, I always say, what have we done and have we started with ourselves? Then when we end up engaging with, I would say at a very local level, specifically around waste management, you can talk to the municipal or the city council. When we go to them, we say, okay, now we have 20 of us who separate plastic. What are you going to do about recycling? And we put them in a space where they have to respond to us. So honestly, I feel that there is, and Mohamad has pointed to this, there is a problem with financing recycling programs. In Dahab, we have had several recycling initiatives done by the locals. There isn't enough money spent by the government or being spent when we sell these plastic waste back to whoever. There isn't enough money raised to be able to pay for the labor and the transportation to Cairo. So this is a place where we as a community decided to spend on it ourselves. So we've looked for ways to recycle the plastics locally and create the closed cycle within the community itself, outside of the governance model. And then when we went to the government, we said this, I'm talking at a very low-level governance. So what we are doing locally is that we are setting the example and then telling the government, now you have to follow suit. You have to provide for us this. And specifically with waste, and when it comes to Sinai, not only do we not have a collection point, transportation to Cairo is very difficult. And lastly, some of the waste management, all they've decided to do is take whatever waste there is and burn it in the mountains. So we just end up breathing in a lot of the burnt plastic. This creates a problem for our health, which makes it easier for me to go out into the community and say, separate your waste, keep it inside. And I'll get into some of the best practices that we can do later, but I really do think if we lead the way, we can work with local, very, very local governance to push them forward. Mohamad has much more experience on a national level, so I'll leave him to talk about the national level advocacy.
وهل انك تتفق على الريمارك الاولى انه فشل المبادرات يعني بصفه عامه في مصر وفي مصر؟
What do you have to say about these initiatives that have failed in certain regions and certain places? Let me start with a very important point, something we've been hearing about a lot, based, of course, on my experience in the field. I would like to tell you that I always visit waste management, waste recycling, and waste segregation sites, and even landfills, and I enjoy it. We should know that these residues, these remnants, this garbage are gold. We should start by raising awareness about that in the local communities, and this is the problem we've been facing. Before considering residues as gold for the society, we should be providing this community with the basic services. This society, this local community has the right not to wake up among waste, among the garbage, among trash. And after that, I can tell them about the residues and how they can transform the residues into gold. We should know that waste is a burden to any society, to any community. And I cannot start by thinking about how to benefit from this burden. I start by securing the basic services to the societies, to the communities, and after that, I think about transforming these residues into a way of a way of making of getting revenues of it. We can start by having RDF, for example. We should start by thinking about things from the very beginning. We shouldn't only think, however, about how to benefit from the residues, but how to start from scratch, from the community, with the community members. Another thing, the majority of Arab countries are well aware of that issue. All the governments know the difficulties we're facing in the management of solid waste. Of course, problems differ from a place to another, from a country to another. In Egypt, for example, we're suffering from the buildings, and the informal settlements, and the arbitrary construction, if we could say so. In Egypt, at the same time, we have the informal sector that can work on extracting value from these residues. The situation in Egypt might be different in rural areas and in urban areas, but in Iraq, for example, I know that the situation is different. After years of efforts, and during the past years, and if we go back to the local establishment managing waste and residues, these find it difficult to manage waste. In our Arab countries, we have large deserts, and some have the tendency to collect the waste and throw them in the desert. If you open Google Earth and check the sites where garbage has been collected, you would notice that the land used to collect waste has been growing and growing, expanding for the past years. So you should know that people know now that we have a problem with waste, with residues. But the major problem is that when we look at the problem, we find a gap. And it is not here about how to solve the problem and complementarity with the community, but rather how to make revenues out of these residues. And this is the gap. It's not only about thinking how to make revenues from these residues, but rather about how to start from scratch, start working with the community members in order for them to be able to manage their waste before making revenues out of this waste. Regarding Tunisia, during the last panel, Aida talked about the study that was conducted in cooperation with ARI, mainly about green hydrogen. And in the framework of this study, we got to meet with the Ministry of Energy Study and many other relevant ministries. Aida had talked as well about that before. The problem in Tunisia is that climate or environment is something that is only relevant, for example, for the Ministry of Environment and not to the other ministries such as the Ministry of Energy and other relevant ministries. And I think that the officials that do not deal directly with the environmental issues and cases are not aware of this problem. The same applies for waste. Those who are the officials who are not directly in charge of dealing with the waste file, if we could say so, isn't interested in dealing with managing waste, knowing that the most important thing is to work in complementarity. It's not only about working in silos or about a ministry working independently from the other. It's about complementarity.
At least I'm going to talk about Sinai, where everyone tries to look the other way and they try to push the problem off. There's a contract for waste management and it belongs to a Bedouin tribe. They tried to bring in a German company and this became an issue. So there's a bit of a mafia, people fighting over the actual income coming in, which isn't enough to cover the cost of collection and separation. One of our biggest issues in Sinai is they actually only look at collection and don't look at the rest of the process. And honestly, unless we bring it up and say, this is an issue, no one is thinking about it. You have a lack of trash cans. The city council doesn't even put out trash cans. Why? Because the company that is collecting the trash did not put out trash cans. Why? Because they don't want to go to the areas that they don't have access to with a car to collect trash cans. There are main points around the city where the company that's in charge of collecting trash cans, that's being underpaid to provide this service by the government, cannot, they're the ones making the decision and they're the ones worried about it. And when we go in to have this conversation, they say, well, go talk to this company, it's there. You still have that. It's no one is quite looking at it until it becomes their problem. It's become a problem because our beaches now are covered in plastic bottles. So when this became a problem for tourism, we can now bring it up to the city council and say, now it is your problem. But it's only at that point. And only, by the way, in areas where tourists are available. For some of the pristine areas where tourists cannot get to are actually covered in plastic. And there are cleanups, which I find are a bit, they're a very good project for public awareness, but I think we're taking responsibility from the government and from the individuals on the cleanups themselves. But that also is where, if you're not engaged in this process, you don't think about, which we're going to get to on the best practices, you don't actually think about how we are affecting. One of the things that I do want to ask here, and this is maybe an opportunity, is how many of you actually use the paper cups outside and did not use the mugs provided? That paper cup ends up in the waste. So each of us here actually added to the waste problem happening in Lebanon, even as visitors here. How many of us use these products wrapped in plastic and are going to leave the plastic in the trash cans? This also adds to the waste management here. We don't think about it until we are the recipients of this plastic. And I didn't think about it until I was in Dahab and I became the recipient of this plastic.
Thank you.
يعني أنا إضافة بسيطة خالص وهي إنه طيب يعني لو بصينا في نطاق مصر هنشوف إن تنفيذ إدارة المخلفات.
If we look at Egypt, we notice that the execution, the legislation, the upper management are two different things, and this complicates things. We might have the upper management following up closely on the issue, fine, but who is in charge of the collection? The Ministry of Local Development and the different departments. And this bureaucracy sometimes complicates things, and there's a disconnection here between the stakeholders, those who have interest in managing waste and those who are at the upper management. If I ask you, for example, to look at the laws, legal frameworks related to waste management, in Egypt we have a clear law, a new law with clear responsibilities. So in the waste management law, we should have clear responsibilities attributed to every stakeholder. This might apply to Jordan, but in other countries where legal frameworks are lacking, I would never know who is in charge of the residues of waste management. If something wrong occurs, if there is a wrong way, for example, of treating certain waste, who is responsible? I'm not saying who is in charge of collecting waste, who is in charge of the mistakes committed, who is in charge of the entire sector. Our responsibility is clearly defined in the law, so legal frameworks need to be developed.
Actually, in Lebanon, it's the same as in Egypt. There are a lot of entities that are involved in the solid waste management process. A lot of ministries, the bureaucracy I was talking about earlier, it is also present in implementing waste management, either in collection or in sorting or in disposal or in treatment. And we can see that now, as you all are walking down the streets of Beirut, there are garbage all over. Because now what's added to this multiple stakeholders being part of the solid waste management is the financial crisis we are having now as a country. So the government can no longer pay for the collection company, as Nadine was saying in Dahab. It's a similar scenario here in Lebanon. So I just wanted to also to shed the light on initiatives that are helping the government or are plugging in this chain of from generation to waste to disposal, plugging in to help the government either in raising awareness across the whole value chain, and either in raising awareness, sorting, collecting, or even treatment of waste, which is sometimes basic treatment, and exporting them, especially when it comes to recycling, to other countries, and helping the government, if I may say now, to deal with this crisis, with the solid waste management crisis we're living in.
يعني نوع الأمثلة هذوما يلزونا السؤال الثاني اللي كان مطروح عليك.
So this takes us to the other question regarding the different stakeholders. I'm not talking about the government, but about the local communities, citizens, companies, private sector companies. What are their roles? Based on your experience, how did these intervene positively in the process, and how can we create communities of practices or communities of practice that work in this field?
Going back to the point where these initiatives exist in Lebanon, and there are so many initiatives and so many startups or NGOs or whatever you may call them, but what is lacking now is communication between these groups for us to be able to go out with one strategy or one integrated solid waste management strategy, as Mohamad was saying, in order to have an impact on the situation now in the government or in the country. I mean, there are so many initiatives I want to shed the light on that are helping a lot. For example, Dawr, as part of Beritech, they have done now a buy and sell platform, and us as Nadeera, we have participated in a clean energy program where we will be, if we got elected, we will be making the first recyclables platform in Lebanon. So this will help us in connecting the people who are generating a lot of plastics and don't know what to do with them with people who really need these plastics. Like Nadine was saying, transportation cost is really very, yes. and in the field now. So when we connect these people together, we are decreasing maybe the transportation costs for them. For example, maybe they live next to each other, but they don't actually know that both of them exist. So these initiatives or these platforms, or as you were saying, the common practices, they will help in solving this problem.
ويمكن عشان انا الرد بتاعي will feed into what Nadine will then further explain. طيب هو
my comments feed into that, and Nadine will explain later. And the situation in Egypt might be different. There might be some similarities between Egypt and other North African countries. In Egypt, we have a large informal sector which employs 150 to 200,000 persons who work on collection and on benefiting from these residues. And this sector is quite well organized, unlike other countries. So this informal sector is well organized in Egypt, unlike other countries. We have four main stakeholders: private sector, public sector, local entities, local communities, and local organizations, charitable organizations in certain cases, and the informal sector. If we were to talk about that issue, I've been working for the past 5 years on waste and waste management, and we hear a lot about the stakeholders engagement, but there is no engagement with the stakeholders. We talk all the time about communication, about engagement. However, we do not see that practically on the ground. Even inside the private sector, we're not engaging enough with the people working with the stakeholders working in the field. Who are the stakeholders? Those who produce these residues or the waste, those who can consume these residues. So interaction, engagement is extremely important. Planning together is extremely important. Of course, we are witnessing developing buildings and constructions, but all stakeholders need to be involved in that. There might be some basic solutions that are being implemented. There is a lack of mechanism, a practical consultation with stakeholders, no stakeholder engagement, which reduces the efficiency of the work of the stakeholders' work. There is a lack of communication between different stakeholders on the ground. The informal sector works alone, charitable organizations or NGOs work alone, the private sector works alone, the public sector works alone. Every stakeholder works in a silo, which leads to leakages, to waste mismanagement, and to a negative impact on the environment. Back to what Nadine now will talk about initiatives. We're talking about community engagement. In Egypt, we've had charitable organizations in rural areas that have been supporting the public sector because the public sector suffers from the burden of these residues. There were many organizations organized in order to collect waste and dump it in sites organized by the public sector. Fine, that is a good cooperation. There are similar initiatives everywhere, but at the same time, some are trying to look for the added value of these residues. This is good. What is our role as individuals in dealing with residues or with waste? Another question to be asked, if we were to talk about responsibilities, and technically speaking, the responsibility of the person producing residues or waste is to dispose of that waste with the right containment. But this individual shouldn't be responsible of all the elements of the entire chain I was talking about. So now we're talking about individual responsibility in recycling and triage and collection. We have many responsibilities, many hats to wear, and this is a burden to some individuals. However, the solution cannot but be developed by the establishment itself, by the public sector itself. We can play a supportive role, but we cannot do everything as individuals. Nadine?
Mohamad covered a lot of what I was going to focus on. I think if we're looking at best practices, I think what we miss a lot is engaging with each other or creating a place where we know how to communicate with each other. You have a lot of initiatives, whether in government or outside of government, that don't actually communicate, yet work on the exact same community. You have an informal sector, you have registered NGOs, you have non-registered initiatives funded by I would like to say, privileged members of the community, because now it's become trendy for us to clean and recycle. And none of them actually speak to each other. One of the things that SNE, which is Sustainable Network Egypt, which I was referring to, was trying to overcome that. It's actually supported by Ari, and I wanted to thank Ari for being our partner in this, is to create a network of individuals who are doing different things so that we at least hear what the other is doing, get ideas for our own initiatives, for our own work, and then build on each other's work, whether it's policy or practice on the ground. One of the first things that came out of this last year, it's a very simple thing, was a checklist for cleanups. I know it sounds crazy, but there was no checklist for Egyptian organizations, and they are very particular in different areas on what to do. And the question is, okay, now we have plastic, what do we do with it? So no one had really given much thought, except when they got to the end of the cleanup and ended up with a whole lot of waste and didn't know how to. So that at this point we created a checklist. The checklist was, don't forget to check out the location, don't forget to go to your policymaker or city council and tell them that you're going there, that make sure it's secure, that it's a safe area for if you're going to take people to go. And lastly, what to do with the waste at the end. Most of it is ensure that you're taking it to a proper drop-off point and not just throwing it at what looks like a trash point, trash collection point, but in reality may not be. So even simple things like this are actually extremely important. And I think it comes out of those who are engaging in this sphere. So I don't think that we don't have the expertise in each country to engage with this. I just don't think we talk to each other enough about where and who and how we can engage in this. Mohamad actually has a lot more information on solid waste and how to deal with it, but he's really busy doing his work, doing his consultancy. I can take that and share it with a bunch of other people. And I think each of us, if we're looking at some of this, can also do this in our day-to-day things, sharing this kind of information. This is where Facebook and social media can be really, really useful. Rather than shouting that there isn't enough waste or that waste is a problem, is we can also share some of the best practices or how to reduce waste. I think we're going to get to reduction at some point. Yes.
نقعد في نفس المجال يعني في التفاصيل نتاع الكوميونيتيز اوف براكتس.
Regarding the communities of practice, thank you for the valuable information, but how can we link what you said to the three different countries? We know that we have enough opportunities to link between activists, organizations between different countries and in different countries. How can you do that?
Have this discussion where we're actually talking about a regional, because we don't quite understand what the power dynamics in each country is, even in different areas. So if I'm going to talk about Egypt, I have no clue, for example, what's happening in southern Egypt. Before I start engaging with Lebanon or Beirut, which is very similar to Cairo, I think that there are certain things that we need to do our work on the ground as initiative, as activists, as organizations, to ensure we actually have a deeper understanding on the ground. To that end, we're actually doing a year-long stakeholder survey, which is just going to communities who are practicing, whether they're doing cleanups or engaging in some way against reducing single use, and asking them simple questions like, you know, who do you speak to? Do you engage with government? Do you believe that we should ban single-use plastic? How do you think we should reduce single-use plastic? Even though it seems that we know the answers, I think asking these community members to engage in this kind of question will give us an understanding of what it actually looks like. Once we start gathering this information, we can engage with subject matter experts like Mohamad in each country and then build regional networks. I think if we build regional networks and then try to move to the ground, I think we impose very idealistic views on what the actual facts on the ground is. And I don't believe any of us in the region actually have a good handle on what waste management, and I'm going to spread this out a bit. In Dahab, for example, we don't just have solid waste management. We have a sewage problem. We have a water problem. We have almost all kind of waste management problems, toxic, hazardous waste. We don't have a handle on what this looks like at a very granular level, at a local level, to be able to start talking on this very high levels.
Thank you, Nadine. Mohamad, متفق مع النقطة الأخيرة. ضعف قنوات التواصل نوعا ما داخل كل
poor communication channels inside the countries. So this should be a priority. Engagement, communication, must be a priority. Based on a personal experience, I might be neutral because I think that there are experiences that we should gain from different countries, from different regions. However, inside Egypt, things change from a province to another, from a governorate to another, and from a city to another. So based on the situation, the social situation, solutions might change even inside the same country. We cannot talk about waste as being an issue that is independent from other issues. Waste and waste management is part of the social issue. In general, I need to examine the culture of the society, the civilization, and the entire background before designing a solid waste management solution. I work in this sector. We do have a lack of information and data, but with time, with experience, we notice that the majority of reports that we are drafting have been drafted before, but there is no network, no single database that can help collect and gather all this data, all these reports, all this information. So we should think about creating a place of exchange, of sharing experiences, a common database, a shared database. And this is lacking in Egypt. We should start by seeing what we have. Yes, we're lacking data, fine, but we have other assets, right? What are the mechanisms that we can create to encourage people to be involved in different networks? There might be many activists working on residues, on waste in some countries. What are their experiences? How can we benefit from these experiences? Regarding the communities of practice, the same question, but about the region.
I will start with Zied al-Iqlimi, or on a national level, and then I will take it back to Lebanon with what we have seen now with the product we launched in Beirut. So على Zied al-Iqlimi, if I may say, before starting or working with Nadeera, I was as well a consultant in solid waste management. So I liked what Nadine, you said that the experts are there, but and for us to have a community of practice for the whole region, we need to start with the communities. And I agree with you like more than 100 times, because when I was 100%, sorry, when I was working as a consultant, I used to do strategies for all the MENA region and Africa. So like Mohamad was saying, that strategies are there, the studies are there. So I made, for example, a strategy for a master plan for a huge city in the MENA region. So I thought that waste will be segregated, will be sorted, processed and treated as I said in the strategy. So when I started working on the ground with communities, I found out that no, my strategies were not like that. I wrote them, but they were not applicable on the ground, because each community, as Nadine was saying, has its different specificity. So for us to have this community practice in the region, we need to go on the ground as first in our countries to see these different practices, even in the country. So now when we have our product, and I will get to it in the last session, we have 3 centers in Beirut and 2 centers outside Beirut. So of course we started and we launched in Beirut, and what we have seen in the first 3 months is very different than in the 2 months, the last 2 months in areas like Beqa and Baalbek. People look into waste in a different way. The value of the waste is different. The generation of the waste is different. So I think going into each community alone, then on each country level, and then we can reach to a place where we can have this practice, this common practice, community practice in the whole region. Other than that, we will be just talking and putting strategies that are a bit reflecting on the community. I'm not going to say that they're not going to reflect on the community, but are still far from what is happening on the ground, either as the government or initiatives or startups or NGOs. We need to master what's happening on the ground and then sit together and do a full plan for solid waste management.
شكرا لين. ذولي النقطة الأخيرة اللي ذكرتها، يعني أنه
Thank you. Nadine had talked about taking into account the characteristics of every region, of every community before designing the strategies. So this discussion is extremely important. It is very important to talk about that while stressing on the importance on just transition. Yesterday, we talked about important components of the just transition, and we said about we talked about the importance of involving engagement, local community members, about taking into account the different civilizations, cultures, before designing theoretical strategies or before imposing any new strategies and policies on them. Back to the third point regarding best practices, but I would like to tell participants on Zoom and here in person, if you have questions, you can raise them now so that you can engage with the speakers and perhaps tell us about experiences from other countries. A round of 3 questions first. Riham Qannut Rifai.
I just have a couple of things that I was like thinking while you were talking about solid waste management. Every single piece of plastic that has ever been produced is still around. This is, you know, a scary fact for me. And while we are talking right now about studying, you know, like and approaching communities, local communities, and so what I'm thinking about is like time. Do we have time if we're you know, we're gonna be waiting for the data to be collected and the communication to happen and then the collaboration to happen, when it feels like, especially regarding plastic and climate change, we are at the 11th hour. So I feel like we haven't really enough covered, you know, like the consequences of our dependency on plastic and single-use plastic. Even if we recycle it, it's not gone, and it continues to break, and we have micro and we have nano contamination, plastic contamination. There's a recent study of 80% you know, of humans have a plastic in their blood right now. So especially because of these single-use, you know, bottles of water. So we're talking about something really scary. And here, like for example, in Lebanon, we don't have access to clean water, to clean drinking water, unless we buy it in plastic. Yes, there are different ways, like you can actually have the gallons, which is reusable plastic. However, the majority of people find these things more portable. So what can we do with, you know, like all of that? Yes, I get that approach top to bottom doesn't really work. And yes, I know that what is applicable, for example, in Holland is not applicable in Syria. But how do we do all of that when time is of the essence? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Please, Madame.
So it's directly related to what Riham, I think, mentioned. I mean, who produces these plastic? These are usually, let's say, international oil companies. You know, this is the only maybe value chain that's left for them after we nationalized a lot of oil companies. So plastic is very important for them. There is an excellent documentary that really I learned a lot from it. It's called Plastic Wars by PBS. It's on YouTube, and it is the story about these recycling symbols on plastic things, and they were invented by the oil company. It's just to make believe, it's recycling idea to make believe that we can recycle them, but we cannot, because plastic is cheap. This is the problem. Plastic is cheap. In the Gulf, it's one of the biggest environmental problems for marine biodiversity is microplastics. It's really destroying a very valuable culturally ecosystem that we have. And we have, of course, oil companies, they give a lot of social responsibility, but again, it's make-believe. If we have a crazy, as science, if we have a crazy scientific idea really to, let's say, put sensors on frogs to measure pollution in the money, believe me, they will give us money. The oil company, why? Because These projects make believe, like the cleaning campaign that Nadine mentioned, make believe that we are solving the problems, but we are not solving them, actually. We solve them only if we regulate them, if we put a tax on it or ban it. That's why my question is, where does this plastic come from? In Egypt, from where is it produced? Who produced it? And how much does it cost? Thank you.
شكرا. باش ناخذ زوز مداخلات ونعطيكم راوند ونشوفوا.
So one more intervention.
الله يعطيكم الف عافيه. وانا بس كنت بعقب على اللي شاركتوه بخصوص نعم. عفوا.
Can you please introduce yourself? I'm Ranim Diab from initiatives, a social initiatives network. We work on the inclusion of women and youth in policy making, mainly related to environment. I wanted to ask you something before asking a question. You talked about a lack of expertise or specialization in the solid waste management. I would like to ask Mr. Nadeem to include youth in a more structured way in the dialogue. If we had, for example, a youth group participating in this workshop, this group might be willing to specialize in the field, and this is how we would be working on the academic level. So this might be an initiative. Another thing, I have a question to ask. What will happen after drafting policies? We're gathered here, we're sharing experience, expertise, we're talking about the importance about ideally designing policies. Fine. What will happen after that? How can we implement these policies? Hence the importance of your experience practically on the ground. In Lebanon, for example, mainly in terms of the toxic waste management, ever since 2002 and until 2016, they've been working on excellent laws. So we have 7 directorates in the Ministry of Health and Environment that work on these laws. They talk about the environmental technology on paper, but practically on the ground, how are things happening? What is our role? What can we do as practitioners? One last question. When we talk about governance, to which extent can this process encourage decentralization, especially if we're talking about Lebanon? Thank you very much. I will retain your last question until the last round.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of comments. I think what Mohamad mentioned about البعد الاجتماعي, the social aspect of this, I think is really important because in a few maybe decades ago, a lot of people were into what we now consider recycling. You know, you'll take the plastic bag and then you'll wash it again and reuse it. And then with time that became more the people on the lower socioeconomic class who would have that, but people on the higher class would basically throw it out and get more and more. And then now everything that's more on the recycled end, like Nadine said, has become more the trendy thing, but it's also expensive. To buy things that are more cleaner, to buy things that are more recycled, it is expensive. So then we're also creating, by that gap, it's sometimes not an issue of whether people want to recycle or not, or want to have access to things that are more greener, so to speak, but these things are expensive. And in going back to Wahab's point about the plastic is going to stay there forever, there are lots of initiatives in lots of different parts of the world. For example, I'll give you 2 from the UK where I come from, where a lot of plastic bags have been taken and then basically melted down and basically made into these beautiful little radios that people can use and speakers for laptops and machines and whatever. Or even like I have a coffee mug that's basically made completely from plastic bags as well, from recycled plastic bags. And those are great usable programs that can basically create value from this waste. But again, how can we then integrate something like this into our use in a way that is affordable for people, but also in a way that could create local solutions, because I think the point about local solutions is really important, and maybe this is where the youth could come also at. They can, bring their innovative ideas of what they need, and I think this is, while it is indeed a problem, but there's a huge opportunity to try to find lots of interim solutions, because policy will take a long time to achieve. And my last point on that also is just on our relationship and this is my personal opinion, our relationship with the environment in Arab countries in general. You go to people's houses, they're so clean, you can eat off of the floor. You go to the streets, they're dirty, our beaches are dirty. It's like it is not our home. And Nadine said something about, cleaning in Sinai, that this is when people clean, or I think it was the tribe, forgive me if I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, that actually takes away the responsibility of the government. But isn't it also our responsibility? This is our land, and I think there has to be this shift, a proper paradigm shift in our relationship to the environment around us, to how we drive and how we eat and what we throw and the air that we breathe, and which actually does affect all of us, whether it's in our health or in our obesity or whatever. And I think that awareness is going to be very, very important, especially that we don't really have policies to implement that. I think this is an area where really bottom-up can also be very effective, not just waiting for the government to kind of give us solutions. Thank you.
Let's have a first round of answers. Leen, I think you...
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the point you were saying, that it starts with us. Yes, it starts with every individual. Okay, the government is there, they need more policies, more strategies, or if these strategies are there, like you were saying that there are 7 or 8 groups working on toxic waste in the ministry, but it's not working. We go back to the problem of policies as well. So it starts with each and every one of us. In Nadeera, we work on, which I will end our panel with introducing you to the product we do, to Yalla Return. But basically, we are working on changing people's behavior. And in this 5 months, we really have changed people's behavior into looking at these recyclables as value and not as rubbish or waste. And I finished my water bottle, okay, I will throw it. No, we have worked with them and worked with the communities where our centers are to tell them that this water bottle, it has a value. And this value, you can use it because we give them credits for these recyclables and go and buy food with it from supermarkets. So they can now know that this is not a water bottle that will end up in the sea. No, I want to take this water bottle to the center so they can recycle it, and I can take these credits and go buy food with it or donate it to charities. So changing people's behavior is very important in waste management, along with the policies and strategies that will take forever to be implemented, or it's not just forever, let's not be pessimistic, a shorter period of time. But I just wanted to say that I'm with you on this. We need to start as individuals to take care of our environment so we can be an example to the authorities or to the legal entities that we want this change. We want our streets to be just like our houses, clean and tidy.
محمد، كانوا فما زوز أسئلة متعلقين بمصدر البلاستيكس ودور الشركات oil companies and multinational companies.
So the other question by Mohamad about about plastic and the role of the oil companies and the other companies. So I'm going to start by saying that the only topic on which I have research is plastic. But also, excuse me, I will also have to speak in English in this phase, because if I speak in Egyptian Arabic, you may not understand me.
I've been working on this for a while. The solution I've reached to date, and this is not by any means something that can be validated yet, solving the plastic crisis we have, because it's a crisis. If you look at Egypt, we're facing a multitude of issues because of plastic pollution in irrigation canals on the coasts. It's affecting other sectors, are being affected by plastic pollution. water flow is being affected in drainage canals and in the Nile River in certain segments because of plastic pollution. The only way to solve it is not to be one-dimensional. It has to be a multi-dimensional approach. There needs to be a social intervention and a technical intervention. The social intervention is inclusive. Policy-making strategies, I mean, the only thing we work on at the moment is strategies. We make all these beautiful documents of strategies on how we're going to solve the plastic issue. The second part that needs to come after the strategy is community inclusion, producer responsibility, consumer responsibility, etc. That's the social part. Social part is much harder to solve than the technical part. The social part requires behavioral change. I have no idea how you do that, but I hope to learn about this. The second part is the technical intervention. The technical intervention is acknowledging that this problem cannot be solved if we don't act now. And acting now requires us to understand the problem, and to understand the problem we need to map the quantities of plastic, who's generating them, where are they ending up, who's producing them, understand the non sort of clear aspects of this. Is there anything under the table that's happening, which 100% is, especially in the context of Egypt. You have an informal plastic manufacturing industry that is impossible to map, and we've tried in a previous project, the government has tried, and it's very difficult. And this informal sector, I'm not even talking about the informal waste sector, it's an informal manufacturing sector, will not formalize. They have absolutely no incentives to formalize in comparison to the informal waste sector. It's recognizing that, and then you map the flow of plastic. You understand where is mismanagement happening, how is the mismanagement happening, is it being burnt, is it being dumped, and what can I do about this mismanagement? What technical intervention can I propose? An example can be some of the irrigation canals in Australia. What they did is they established a network of plastic capturing nets. So at every what we call in Arabic مبازل أو فتحات بتاعت قنوات الري or the irrigation canals, it captures the plastic and it's emptied on a weekly basis. So that's a temporary solution. It is a technical intervention that is happening in a multi-dimensional approach where there's in parallel social interventions happening, social innovation. Innovation is crucial with plastic pollution because plastic, we have to acknowledge, is a very useful material. It's very durable, it's very cheap, it's very easy to produce. There's so many positives to plastic that we hate to say, and it's going to be very hard to just throw it out of the window. So this is what I would probably have to say. We cannot approach it from one side. We need to approach it from both sides. We need to start shouting the word mismanagement a lot. We're burning a lot of plastic in the Middle East. We're burning a lot of plastic. We're dumping a lot of waste into water courses, and this is causing other downstream issues.
شكرا محمد. Nadine.
So I'm gonna build on what you have to say. Actually, we have in the Red Sea in particular something called supercorals, and they are highly efficient at higher temperatures. So they could, and I don't know if everyone in this room knows, but I would assume, but I'll just mention anyway, most of the oxygen we breathe comes from water, comes from the oceans. Supercorals are not very well studied, but because of how we handle both sewage and waste in Egypt in particular, we are killing off these corals in the Red Sea. When a plastic touches a coral, it's 80% it will catch a disease. We went from bright, beautiful colored corals to now almost everything is gray. And this is very, very sad. But what I'm pointing to is plastic is even a problem, not just from like we can then grab it from the shore and recycle it, but just its introduction to our environment is problematic. I think honestly what we have is an economy around plastic. Plastic is very inexpensive. It actually mostly supports the poorer of our societies because they can buy things in very, very small quantities. They can afford a plastic bag. They can't afford a cloth tote bag. They have developed their own household economies around this use of plastic. One of the problems that we find with recycling, I'll talk about dahab, is that a lot of the Bedouin community reuses as plastic once or twice to put different oils and for different things that they use for their household. So our trash does become something useful for them, but after then it becomes very difficult for us to recycle or reuse these plastics. So if we're looking at how to deal with plastic, one of the things that we really really need to look at, which goes to it being something that's very pricey or very trendy, is that we don't make it affordable for the people who really need this intervention. We haven't found a way to make plastic alternatives really affordable for them. One of the policy shifts, or one of the policy recommendations that I constantly have for the governor, is to create a fund where anyone who's being fined for using, for disposing plastic, there is a plastic waste fine in Egypt. There is no other way to fine any kind of pollution. It's a pollution fine. To use that to support some of the informal businesses, some of the supermarkets, to be able to afford to give away tote bag, cloth bags, reusable bags. The plastic bottles. Honestly, I don't use them anymore. I use 2 upstairs. I'm taking them home with me. I don't leave plastic anywhere. And I think the problem is we don't hold ourselves accountable. And I think there's a lot that we can do to change. And honestly, it comes from our personal intervention. If we wanted this hotel to change, it would have just taken a few of us to come together and say, no, we don't use plastic bottles. I'd like a water dispenser and some glass bottles. It's difficult for example, Ari to push this, but as guests, they will respond to us. And also thinking of this on how we live our life. So one of the things that I'm going to recommend for everyone in this room is to actually understand how much plastic you use. I spent 6 months, and this is how I changed a lot of mine, and you begin to understand how big of a problem this is. I challenge everyone in this room to spend 6 months and don't throw out a single piece of plastic. If you have something that comes in a plastic bag, just put it in a big bag and put it in your living room. I bet you within 6 months you won't have a place to sit in your living room. When I did that, and I'm a single person, I literally had to explain to guests that I'm sorry I don't have chairs for you because I have tons and tons, not literally tons, but I have huge bags of plastic all over my room. When I recognized this problem, I began to think of ways to solve it. I don't think we realize how much plastic we are using. The ketchup bags, they're made of plastic. The cups, the paper cups, have plastic lining. Everything we use are made of plastic, and we don't really push back on the producers that make this. When you start pushing back, and I started this with grocery stores, they started providing alternatives. So I said I don't use plastic bags. They brought, unfortunately, took a bit of education. They bought me other thicker plastic bag, reusable plastic bags. But then it becomes the conversation that we have in the community about this. This is when you start initiating change. Another thing that I really want to point to is we need to engage businesses in this, and young entrepreneurs. You had mentioned engaging youth. So first I'd like to say this is my cousin. So I've had a conversation about her several times about the importance of plastic and how it's really difficult for us to find travel kits that don't use plastic, and for hotels, specifically in the tourism industry. And she created this product, which is very interesting. It's called Ala Safar. This uses her entire line, minimizes plastic. Her plastic is sugarcane. And what she did is developed actually everything in bar form. So the conditioner, the soap, the hair conditioner, the body lotion, and even dish soap is found in these small, they're not, we're so used to lather, there still takes a bit of education, but now we have this and we're about to launch them. I love this product, not just because it's my cousin's, but actually because she saw a problem, saw an opportunity, and built towards it. And I think these are the kind of conversations we need to have with our community, but it starts with educating ourselves and ensuring that we know how much plastic and how much of a problem this is.
شكرا نادين، شكرا على البرودكت. قاعدين ننتقلوا خطوه بخطوه نحو افضل الممارسات على صعيد
We are trying to move step by step to know what are the best practices at the macro and micro levels. So we are going to take a round of questions on the best practices after this round of questions.
Thank you all. I'm going to try to repoliticize the discussion a bit. Because I don't think individual initiative or even entrepreneurship is not essential. It is essential, but I want to connect it a bit more to this notion of just transition. So on 3 levels. One, I'd love to hear from our panelists on the economy of waste management. I mean, I think Nadine started talking about it, Mohamad as well. I mean, but how much does it cost us as a society? Who is it costing more? What is the cost to segments of society? I mean, we're speaking in a country, in Lebanon, where we have some of the highest cancer rates in the world, and while we cannot prove things linearly, but there's a lot of indication that some of the cancer rates are higher in areas close to where there's open-air burning of dump sites. So what is the, but also how much money is related? Again, talking about Lebanon, I don't know the numbers for other countries, but a few years ago when there were contracts for collection and sorting, my recollection is Lebanon had some of the highest rates per ton in the world, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I think our garbage was costing more than the garbage in Sweden. Per capita, it was insane. And it might still be insane. So I think there's an economy. Someone is benefiting from this, and someone's paying the cost. And I think we have a good idea of who it is, but we need to go out and prove that, you know. And I feel very passionate about this because there's a lot of anger in me about the issue of waste management, because it's gone to the point. I actually think our messaging should be, your waste is killing us. The waste is killing some people in our society, and this should be the message, and that should be the urgency. So I think there's the issue. I'd love to hear more about the economy of waste management. And in relation to the economy of waste management, there's also the economy related to the solutions of waste management. Let me explain. There has now been an explosion of consultancies, NGOs, and so forth to find technical problems. When you go to the ministries of environment in our region, they actually look like NGOs. They run on projects. Okay? They don't run like ministries. Talk about sustainability. The second the donors move on to something else, the money will run out. Okay? So we need to also question, again, and this is why we need to understand how much are our public authorities paying on waste? Who are they doing it? What are the funders funding? Where are all the reports going? We talk about lack of data, but how much money has been spent from taxpayers, but mostly from donors, on studies, and who is reading these studies? I mean, the Ministry of Environment, again, the ones I know in Lebanon, the drawer is full. I think Leen was talking about it. The number of studies that have been done, good quality studies, but no one is being held accountable for not implementing it. So one, I think, is just this notion of linking it back to cost, who's paying, who's not paying, and the economy of waste management and the economy of the solutions to waste management. One. Two, I think on the solutions, to go back to what Riham was saying about the timing, I wonder if we can be more radical. Countries in East Africa simply banned single-use plastics. You know, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda. Actually, if any of you ever go to Rwanda, when you arrive, they search your bag. And you think they're looking for drugs, but they're actually looking for plastic bags. No, I'm actually not joking. If any of you go to Rwanda, you're not allowed to bring a plastic bag into the country. And you should see, I mean, I had mistakenly put my shoes, like any good Lebanese, in a plastic bag. And, I had an earful by the customs. What prevents us? So I think this goes back to the question, who's producing the plastics? So in the countries, there have been some studies, and I think this is where we can learn from other countries. They found that countries that had a domestic industry producing the plastics, there was a lot of resistance to implement this. So maybe we need to understand this. And if there are people who need, we need to kind of set a cost to sort of say, okay, maybe we need to distribute more quality bags. But what is preventing us today from politically, to go very high and say, we just want, we're not going to ban all plastics. That would be unrealistic. But let's start with the plastics that we think we can bag. And frankly, my grandmother lived very well without plastic bags. And, it was fine. All the plastics bags ended under her bed, for years and years and years. So I think, can we think of more radical solutions? Because I agree the bottom-up approach, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in finding solutions. And maybe if we cannot get central government will, you can maybe convince, like what Nadine does, areas that are dependent on tourism, that are dependent on sustainable environment to kind of do these bans. And that might work. But can we shoot for the moon sometimes? Can we change the discourse? It is. Or the other one is actually price the externalities. So there's a cost. In Lebanon supermarkets, they give you 2 bags. Actually, they put a bag in a bag so it doesn't, throw. In France, I have to pay for every single bag. I can tell you, I don't forget my tote bag anymore because I'm like, oh shit, I'm not going to pay 50 cents again for a bag. So maybe we need to price that externality. And again, while accompanying the most vulnerable to make sure we don't leave them behind. But I actually think we need to politicize. And to finalize with the politicize, I want to go back to this issue of social movement. Because I think we are here in a country that there was a massive social movement, not that long ago, on the garbage. In Tunisia, there have been massive social movements around the garbage. In Morocco, there have been social movements around the garbage. I don't know about Egypt yet. You know, there are no social movements these days in Egypt. No, but you know, you know, and I think we need to rethink the garbage. I hear the technical solutions, and we need to be there with the technical solutions. I think we have done leaps in terms of having the studies, the plans, the laws, the stuff. But I think to go back to this notion of just transition, we need to repoliticize the issue. And we need to become a lot more radical in our demands. And I would think, you know, I think, Mohamad, you started, this is first and foremost a public health issue. Actually, we are in a country where it is literally a public health issue, you know, and it's been a public health issue for years. And somehow that social movement has died down. And I think they only got scared when people got really, really, really mobilized. And I think we need to remobilize. So I mean, I'd love to hear about this and the economy. Who's winning, who's losing, very, very, I mean, on a macro level at this stage.
Thank you, Nadine.
شكرا على النقاش المهم والمعلومات القيمة. في منطقتنا هناك صراعات
and information in our region. We have a lot of conflicts that have left a lot of military waste. My question to the speakers, what about the national policies related to waste management, military waste management, even especially that we all know that the waste management of this military waste is left to foreign companies who are doing that against a profit. I'm going to speak about Iraq and about the waste in Iraq, just like Maha said. But this matter has become political because of the mass graves that made the waste management operation or process unveil many skeletons and unveil realities, other realities and hard truths. So I don't know if you have any idea about that. When we're talking about plastic, there is a need to mix the environmental issue with the social issue. Today, for example, maybe we can find solutions at the medium and long range, sustainable solutions, like, for example, local communities, like, for example, municipalities. In Tunisia, we have municipalities and we have national local initiatives. We talked to the waste collectors, the plastic collectors. We gave them motorcycles and we gave them a uniform and everything. And we told them, actually, I didn't give them, but I told them to give them. And we told them that this way we can protect the waste collectors or plastic waste collectors from being used and exploited, because the main idea of plastic waste collection could be used and profit could be generated from it. I even called an Italian company in order to discuss more the biodegradable bags. However, and I heard an answer that said that our bags are using potato leftovers to make the biodegradable bags. So it is true that we have more important issues, or what is called more important issues. However, this should not make us shy away from looking at this question and from examining this question, especially that the other countries have started many regulations regarding that, like for example in France, that has banned the use of plastic bags unless you pay for it. However, we do know that this is highly politicized and highly political because, for example, in Tunisia, there are families that are wealthy and influential that are important biodegradable bags.
When we're speaking about how to manage the waste after it's disposed, in the big scheme of things, it's very clear. We need technical solutions, and we need at the same time, it's a question of government, of governance, of political will, of political change. But when it comes to human behavior, in terms of what we produce, what we consume, and how we dispose the waste, I totally agree with your approach, Nadine, but maybe just like there is just a little bit of difference between how I think and you. Like I think a little bit in a more pragmatic way, because I don't think this human behavior in general can be controlled by somehow relying on the goodwill of the people, on just educating the people and raising awareness, on just their ethics. Not everybody is like us. And we can mobilize like a group of people, but not everybody. How I believe things can be done is just by law enforcement and by, as Nadine was mentioning, taxing negative externalities and de-taxing or subsidizing positive externalities. And when it comes, for example, to production, also we need to give financial incentives because those private firms are profit-oriented. If you do not give the proper incentives for both the consumers and the producers for them to make their choices accordingly, I don't think on a larger scale, on a country scale, regional, global scale, any change can be made. So it's just this nuance that I wanted to make, which is indeed in line with what Nadim earlier said. Thanks.
Thank you, Farah. Many comments here. I'm sorry, الوقت صعيب. مش نرجع لنادين على اقتصاد النفايات بصفة عامة. كنا يعني من التجربة.
Thank you, Nadine, for or any thoughts on the economy of waste management?
More Mohamad's space, and so I'm not going to step on his. I'm definitely not going to contradict him. But I do want to go on accountability. So the reason I bring it up is because we've all come here to talk about just transitions, but we're not willing to put in the effort. So I'm asking each of you to hold yourself accountable. When I'm talking about policy, for example, in Dahab, we're talking about, and I'm using this as a sort of small case study. When I'm talking to policymakers, I'm saying, do not allow, we have, fortunately and unfortunately, but fortunately for the case of waste or plastic reduction, is we have one entrance in Dahab where plastic producers have to come in through, and one entrance in Sinai. There's one tunnel that goes in, and we're talking South Sinai and Dahab both have I should say the community in Dahab has spearheaded governorate-wide ban on single-use plastic. There was a huge discussion on what this means. Do styrofoam count as plastic? And there was an educational process on some of this. We did work with, for example, when we were talking about this ban, to ensure that this will be implemented, because having a ban and no plastic alternatives just makes a policy that is absolutely useless. So we started a company, or I supported someone in founding a company to provide South Sinai with plastic alternatives. Some of them had, were actually, I shouldn't say they were plastic alternatives. Some of them were single-use plastic alternatives where they were cheaper, but multiple-use plastic versus the cloth, which you're talking about price difference of anywhere from 15 times to 150 times the price of this plastic, this multiple-use plastic bag, which is extremely problematic. I don't support it, but you have to find these sort of incremental changes. On the other side, you have to find accountability. One of the biggest problems in Egypt is we don't place accountability on the individual. So we don't have a way to fine the use of plastic, whether at a supermarket level or even provide a fine or a fee for the use of a single plastic bag. When the Red Sea, which is another governorate that canceled single-use plastic, they were taken to court and they couldn't enforce the single-use plastic ban because we don't have legislative support for any kind of fine or fees or anything. There's only a 10,000 Egyptian pound fine for polluting, and then you're actually fining this poor individual who doesn't understand what's going on, who happened to throw his plastic out. So there is a lot of governance work. What I'm talking about is that if you show, and this is where I disagree with Nadine, I think we need to depoliticize it, and at least in Egypt. If I show that a large enough segment of the population supports something like this, and it could become a political issue, but I'm warning them before it becomes a political issue, you actually have a partner in the government to work with. So we have partners in the Ministry of Environment that we work with. They're actually quite ineffective because they don't have the accountability mechanisms. The other partner that we have and who handles the sustainability, the 2030, Egypt 2030, is the Ministry of Economic Planning, and she is actually quite strong and able to push, but unfortunately she doesn't do with single-use plastic. So when we're talking about this, you actually do need to do a mapping. You need to do the proper work of this kind of advocacy. Find your entry points, and that honestly starts with, and the thing I mentioned before, is we don't actually do the work on the ground, as in mapping and finding out where the people are, where the individuals who are interested in this topic, who's actually responsible. I don't know who's responsible for the plastic bags, and it's very difficult to hold small producers, we call them in Egypt تحت بير السلم, which is underneath the stairs. This is where they create this plastic. You close one, two others are going to open. So we have to find more holistic solutions, and to be able to create these holistic solutions with accountabilities and creating a social movement requires us first to do a stakeholder mapping, which I have yet to, at least in Egypt, I know there is no proper stakeholder mapping of who engages around reducing single-use plastic, and those are people who actually believe in ending single-use plastic, let alone the entire community.
كان ممكن نادين قبل ما تعطي الكلمة محمد إجابة على نديم يعني ذكر نقطة أنه نعلي في سقف
Mohamad, could you please answer Nadim, because we want to raise the ceiling of radicality.
One of the things that I actually believe is that radical is the end goal, not necessarily where we start. I'm not revolutionary, I am a reformist, but I do believe that without radical change, we will not be able to address the climate crisis. There's no way forward. So I believe that we can be very radical in our vision. This is one of the reasons I moved to Dahab, was I decided to create a small case study and try to push for literally a single-use plastic ban when no one was talking about it. And I pushed pretty hard. I just believe that it takes, for example, eating an elephant, you do it one bite at a time. It's finding out where the community is and starting to push them in that direction. So I'm not anti-radical necessarily, I'm just anti-revolutionary. You can't move people or society giant steps. And I think particularly for Egypt, politicizing everyone just scares everyone. So I think you also, if we're talking about whether to make it more political or not, will depend on the group or the context, or being very sensitive to the perception of it. Politicizing in Egypt will engage the activist community, which is great, and make it impossible to implement on the ground. In Lebanon, it actually has a very different effect. So you have to be very responsive to the political climate in each country to be able to decide whether you want to politicize it or not. And these are kind of strategic decisions which we try to apply across different countries, across the board, whether we're talking about environment, human rights, that don't necessarily apply. Tunis looks very different than Morocco, looks very different than Egypt, and looks definitely very different than Lebanon.
شكرا نادين. محمد, اقتصاد البلاستيكس ولا النفايات بصفة عامة, مين استفاد
plastic economy, Mohamad? Who is benefiting from this? How can we make sure we could avoid the monopolization of this matter by the capitalist companies?
I want to probably take a go at every question. So I'll start with the first question that I think is the easiest one to answer. So in Iraq, the key issue is the leftover challenges from the conflict with regards to, for example, unexploded mines. So unexploded mines, you get someone from the military to remove them. Now what do you do with this? Are you going to store it, or are you going to throw it away as waste? And this was one key issue they're facing. The next step on what to dispose it. And a lot of it sometimes, when they don't have the mechanism or facilities or financial capability of dealing with it adequately, they just send it to a landfill or a dump site. The majority of Iraq currently is operating on open dump sites that are in the middle of a desert. Generally speaking, that's not necessarily a disaster, but it's unsustainable. So when you go to these dump sites, they're becoming increasingly complicated areas because of the various forms of waste found there. You don't find this complexity in Egypt, for example. The worst thing you find in Egypt is in the dump site, you'll find some medical waste with municipal waste. But very hard, you won't find hazardous waste. But in Iraq, you find a variety of waste. The issue of finding leftovers, so for example, dead bodies or finding any evidences from previous conflict, this is not only in Iraq, this is everywhere. Even in Egypt, I've stayed in a dump site for a couple of days when I was doing a study. And I saw a lot of things that was, if I've seen it before, I would think it's absurd, but it's not. A lot of illegal activity happens in dump sites in the MENA region. Dump sites are used as areas that are not monitored. They're not well regulated, and especially because we locate them in the farthest area possible. And authorities don't have the money to go there and monitor it on a regular basis. So they become hubs for hiding things. A lot of people live in dump sites to do their illegal activities. So I have come across some of the challenges faced in Iraq. The issue of war-related waste is very complicated. I'm not an expert on it. What I can say is, in the majority of countries, it's usually dealt by the army. It is not by the waste authority. So the army has the responsibility of dealing with that waste. And armies do not care about sustainability whatsoever. So the last thing they're going to care about is saving the environment. They're going to find the most convenient way to deal with that waste. This is an issue that probably needs to get politicized, especially in areas of conflict. And especially with, I would not blame the governments of those countries. It's the governments that come into other countries and cause these issues to become bigger and don't take any responsibility. So this is on the area of war-related waste. So waste, or the economy of waste, or the economy of plastic, and it's very complicated. I'm still not very experienced, to be honest, on economics. What I have understood now is the informality in some countries with regards to manufacturing makes it very hard to understand the flow of money from one stakeholder to another. In waste, not necessarily plastic waste, but in waste management overall, the biggest economic burden is fuel. There's a lot of transportation to be done because of inept planning, and we don't have adequate integration of solid waste management in initial planning when we have any sort of urban expansion. So we end up having to plaster solid waste management on urban expansion, and this eventually results in a lot of costs that could have been avoided because of transportation and fuel. So this is the major burden we have that needs to be tackled one way or another. There is innovation. If I look quickly across the Middle East, the Gulf region, their primary challenge at the moment is land, aside from Saudi Arabia. If I look at the UAE, if I look at Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, all of these countries are waste is very politicized. They're taking it very seriously. There's laws, strategies being published. Over the past 10 years, they've done a lot of changes to the way they're managing waste. Some of them have public-private partnership participation. Some of them are just completely privatized. Some of them are public. In the case of Kuwait, they have an area probably the size of 10 football fields of tire waste that has come from across other areas across the region as well. And this is generating a lot of methane, it's generating a lot of other gaseous emissions. So they're taking it very seriously because their land, or using that land for waste, is losing a lot of value. They don't have that much land. The challenge in Egypt, we have a lot of land that we're not going to ever use. So it's easy to just dump it in the desert. So the challenge is different. If we look at Iraq, Syria, Jordan, it probably differs because of Iraq and Syria and the conflict. The main issues they have at the moment is recovering a waste management system. We need to recover some form of waste management system. Egypt, I would say the main issue we have, aside from, in Egypt, I would argue it's a political issue. It already is a political issue. And to a large extent, it needs to continue being politicized. The problem in Egypt is the complexity of working with the informal sector. And will I have a concluding note? Yes. Okay, so I'll leave that part to the concluding note. But in Egypt, it is a social problem. And until you solve the social problem, no technical intervention will work. And I guess in North Africa, I don't have as much experience, so I probably won't speak that much. It might be similar. It's already social problems. Easily said, when you have increasing social pressures and social challenges, there's an increase in informal activity and informal waste management activity as well. Did I miss any question? I think there was, yeah, that was it. صح, that's perfect.
Leen, many questions.
I'm going to answer a bit of them. Continue from what Mohamad was saying about the Arab countries, the GCC countries. So now UAE and Abu Dhabi, they will start the ban of single-use plastics soon. I think it started today or tomorrow. So it's very interesting to monitor this. If people, because in GCC countries, they are a consumer country. They buy a lot of packaged products and plastics. So so it's very interesting for us to monitor if this will work in an Arab country. I know we were saying that each country or each part of the world has its own specificity, but in the end, we all come from the same culture. So it's interesting for us to monitor this. As well as Nadine was saying, I think implementing a polluter pay principle is very important for us in this region, especially in Lebanon. And what we have seen with the product we are working on, that people, when they know the value of the waste, or when they know what's happening to the waste, they will become more aware of sorting it and more aware of consuming less recyclables. But in Lebanon, I wanted to add to the economics as well. We have, and what we have experienced now are the informal sector, which are the scavengers, like you were saying, the Zebbaleen in Egypt. We have this now in Lebanon, and it's growing, and it's growing massively. And these informal sectors or pickers started to lobby, that they lobby each other. So like إنه بيغطوا على بعض, if I may speak in Arabic. And this is what we are facing now when we want to sell our recyclables, as well as we want to credit people. When they come, we weigh their credits. I will go into details at the end on the best practices. People are more aware of these scavengers, and they tell us, if you don't want to pay this much, I will go to the scavengers and sell my plastics for them, and they will give it to me in cash. So these scavengers now are a huge, if I may say, stakeholder in the solid waste management process in Lebanon. And I think for us to understand the economics, they will have a huge part of it, because they are as well buying and selling. So they became a major player in the system, if I may say.
Okay, thank you, Leen. Maybe one last round for the three of you to conclude this session about, let's try to mix the best practices and the alternative model. What have you seen around you based on your experience these past years? وانا سويتشيت بالانجلش، خلينا نرجع للعربي. افضل الممارسات اللي ريتوهم حولكم بناء على تجربتكم.
So the best practices that you've seen around you based on your experience, and the fact, and based on these experiences, can we use them in other countries? What about sharing experience, sharing knowledge and information regarding best practices in waste management?
best practices. Honestly, I'm just as new to this, but I actually feel that advocacy is the same. And waste management, everyone in this room produces waste. Everyone in the world produces waste. So for me, as a community organizer and as an advocate, I feel that this is a great entry point for us to actually sort of fulfill the saying that everything is politics and all politics is personal. This is an opportunity for us to really take this home. So best practices is to engage with all levels of the community and really bring them around this issue. In Dahab, you have from the hotel owners who are registered hotels to the very, very informal Bedouins who are just recovering some of the plastic bottles to use them at home. This is an opportunity for us to engage all these sectors in a place that's really useful in a direction. So I would say best practices for around waste management is to actually bring in some of the best practices for advocacy and organizing and really work with these communities and not forgetting any community. So one of the areas that I have been trying to reach out, which is a bit difficult, is to reach out to the Zabbalin. They are unorganized and they're very difficult to engage with. There is someone who is working to unionize them, and we're looking for a representative to come join us. So to actually use some of the practices that we use in other ways and actually bring it to these areas that are not as, I would like to say, not as sexy, not as controversial, but actually extremely useful. When this issue was brought up in Lebanon, everyone stepped forward. Because like I said, every one of us makes waste and every one of us will have to deal with the health concerns coming out of waste.
Leen, you have about best practices, and if you can tell us, take this opportunity to tell us about the product Yalla Return.
Yeah, sure. So I just said a bit of things about Yalla Return before, but I will introduce it now like formally. So in Nadeera, we have launched our Yalla Return product 5 months ago in Beirut. We had our first shop in Tariq Jdide, a very densely populated area in Beirut. Yalla Return is a very simple program. You just need a phone. You download the application. It's also called Yalla Return. You register using your phone number, and you can learn about wastes that we accept that are recyclable or non-recyclable waste. You can deposit your waste in one of our centers. You just have your own QR code. Each person has this specific QR code. You come to our stores with your clean recyclables. We weigh them, and based on the weight, you get credited. These credits, you can either use them in supermarket vouchers to go buy any type of food from retailers we are working with, or you can just simply donate them to any charity organizations of your choice. As well, all of this is on our application, and for people who do not have this smartphones or even are engaged in the informal sectors, we have for them an offline card. It's the same system with a QR code where we can quantify and trace. Here we can go to your point, Mohamad, that we need to trace or you need to have a database on waste management or generation of waste. So Yalla Return could be, if I may say, this platform or this database to collect information on recyclables being generated. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in the next slide, you can see our numbers until Zied pulls it up. Yes, this one. So we have 3 outlets in Beirut and 2 outlets outside Beirut, one in Bekaa region and another one in Baalbek. In our first 5 months, we have collected more than 7 tons of recyclables, doing more than 2,900 transactions. And here I want to go back to the point on changing people's behavior. We really trace this, or we really saw this from the first day we opened, I remember an old lady with her daughter coming to the store, and the old lady was like, "No, it's not interested. I don't want this. I don't. You want me to give you my plastics, and then what you will give me points." And then her daughter, here we can see the importance of youth, telling her, "No, it's good for the environment. We need to do that." And now, this lady is our super user. She has the most number of credits, and she is the most person who redeems vouchers. She calls me and she tells me, "I redeem your vouchers and they help me in getting groceries for my house." And as well, there was a little girl from one of the schools. She called and she told me that I will be collecting all the plastics from my class for us to give them to you. So you can see that this initiative started maybe in one area in Beirut. Now, if you can have the last slide, Nadine, please. So these are our outlets. I just wanted to shed the light on our final outlet in Mar Mikhael. We had a very, very small shop. It's like a 3x3 shop, and we outgrew the shop in like 2 months, and we just opened a huge 240 square meter shop for us in Mar Mikhael to be able to or to be able to reach more people, because really people are understanding that the plastic bottle or the Lebanese container is just not plastic. It has a value. We need to take it out from the garbage can, give it to people who will recycle it, who will make sure that it will not end up in the sea or in the ocean. And in parallel, we are benefiting from these recyclables by either helping people in need or getting groceries and using them.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
يعطيكم الصحة
Thank
هذه
you.
على المبادرة. محمد، كلمة الختام تعرفك على أفضل الممارسات.
طيب لا يعني أنا what I'll probably like to do is to give best practices based on personal experience, working in the field for a while. One from the side of social interventions, and two is from the side of at a high level, at a national level, at a policy level. So if I start with social interventions. So looking at Egypt, for example, احنا في مصر, we have a lot of villages in Upper Egypt or in the south, and all of them have very similar models where they have a community-based association that provides door-to-door collection at a very cheap rate to the local community that then eventually feeds into I don't know, an agreed point of waste accumulation that the formal sector can collect from and throw the waste away into a dump site or a landfill. I consider this best practice because it's not implemented in all areas in Egypt. It's implemented in certain villages, but not all villages by any means. It helps keep these areas somewhat more organized than others. One thing I've experienced myself is with time, communities have learned on how to keep their own community somewhat clean. A very nice example is communities that highly depend on irrigation water flow in certain seasons. They've learned to plant trees across the banks of the irrigation canal so that no one can throw waste on that side. There is a sense of community respect. But in other communities, they don't respect that. They just see the tree, they still throw the waste. So in those communities, what I saw, and this was in a village in MENA, is they start to use the waste from palm trees to build like a net, to start to capture the waste so it doesn't fall in the irrigation canal. All temporary solutions built over each other. But yani, the point here is they're starting to find their own local ways of keeping the water clean somehow. The best thing you can do, and the only country I've worked on or learned from that has done this well, is India. India has done very well is community engagement, community involvement, community integration in solutions. They, in a lot of areas, especially in, I think it's at southeast near Chennai, I could be mistaken, but a lot of the villages there, what they do is they don't just bring a foreign solution. They go with the community, they empower the community, they try to make the community lead their own solution. That is the only way I see with villages or rural areas across the Middle East. They need to feel empowered to have the solution. If they feel it's alien, they will not be invested, the solution will not be solved. Let us also acknowledge that we don't have the resources to provide excellent waste services, so we need to empower these communities. A personal experience I had, and this was a learning process for me, I was working in a village in Upper Egypt, the very start of Upper Egypt, south of Giza, and I was trying to raise awareness on you should not burn this much waste to the community. And the guy he ate me. He's like, أنا مش لاقي أكل أصلاً هتيجي تكلمني عن المخلفات. يا عم أموت مش فيش مشكلة. So I'm talking to him about something that he sees as a luxury. I'm here to waste his time. I'm not even acknowledging the social issues he's facing, and I'm talking about waste. So that was a mistake. It was a learning process. I started to realize you cannot bring just the narrative of waste is bad for your health, because maybe that is at the very bottom of what their priorities are. Maybe at a more higher level, best practices, what I would say is there's something I've studied, has not been implemented a lot, but in the context of MENA region countries that are not Gulf, that have informal sectors, the best way forward, or probably the only way forward, is to adopt a concession framework, أو يعني إطار للتنازلات. You cannot have an instant solution to waste issues at a national level. You need to acknowledge that it will be a long process. The problem with politics is politicians want a solution in 2-3 years within their term. That doesn't work in waste management, especially in a situation with the informal sector. So you need to adopt this concept where me as a government, I have to concede some of my authority. And me as an informal sector, I have to concede some of my autonomous sort of, I can do whatever I want and no one is monitoring what I'm doing. And of course, for both sides, it's hard to accept both concepts. Government is used to authority and informal sector is used to do whatever they want and not being held accountable. So it's finding the right balance and the right framework, the right sort of plan to implement this cautiously, implement this with adequate actual stakeholder engagement and consultation. And considering, I think the first thing they say, oh, financial incentives for the informal sector. Informal sector does not need financial incentives. The informal sector is governed by people who are informal and operate in a very informal way, who have a lot of money. They don't need these incentives. There needs to be, and there just needs to be enforcement. Oh, that's my voice. No, that's fine. I thought someone was talking. I was just going to mention one last example. I'm sorry I took too long. But in East Asia, I'm not going to mention any countries in specific. Historically, a lot of these countries were not clean countries. They had a lot of issues related to waste management. But due to political reasons, enforcement is much easier. So they're enforcing requirements, penalties, enforcing means to manage your waste, and thus the community is cleaner. I'm not asking us to enforce things blindly. Actually, probably that's far away from what I want. I'm saying on certain things, there needs to be actual enforcement. This is what the government needs to focus on. And from the other end, there needs to be accountability and willingness to begin with, to start to formalize. Formalization is a long process. It's a complicated process. I unfortunately don't even have a positive case study of formalization to date across the world. All of them have faced a lot of the formalization that has occurred in several Asian countries eventually end up with conflict. They end up with confrontation with government. But the only framework that has worked, at least at the local level, in case studies across India, is a concession model, a concession framework that is taken one step at a time, being careful and acknowledge the social complexities and social problems of each community. Yeah, that's everything I wanted to add.
I just want to say, and I think this is something important, I've gotten really tired of waiting for government to deal with this waste management problem, so specifically plastic waste. So I think we need to find people in each community that feel this way and are willing to take, because all it really takes at the end of the day is sitting in the city council's office, and they're generally older women, I would say. I've gotten older as I've started to work on this, and as I've gotten older, I've gotten used to literally just sitting in their office being extremely persistent and saying, you have to now answer me, find the least controversial person. And honestly, waiting for this, the government to solve this problem isn't the solution. I think as a community, we need to come together and say, we are now insisting that this problem be found and we find solutions together.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you for this closing remark. نشكرك، نشكر محمد، نشكر لين، نشكركم في القاعة. هو الموضوع متعقد وصعيب. نشكركم على صبركم في الوقت المتأخر من النهار.
Thank you for your patience and for staying with us throughout this long day. And hopefully this is going to be a food for thought. We thank the interpreters. And we would like to thank all the team of ARI that has participated in this, and see you later.